In this video, we're going to cover how to quickly model out and texture a model. And this is pre-recorded, and I'm just going to do a voiceover here. And the first thing I'm doing is shutting down distractions. I'm closing Facebook, my web browser, Skype, any chatting programs, silencing my phone, things like that that are going to distract me from what I'm working on. Just, one of those basic things that'll help speed you up. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to build a model, and I have some concept art I'm going to use, and I'll use that concept art to not only help me model it, but also texture it to speed me up. So here I'm creating a camera plane on my front view, and I'm adding the PNG of the concept art that I've already made. And I'm going to place this in my front view, and I'm going to then make a model and move it to fit this piece of concept work. I'm going to go ahead and move this camera plane back so it isn't right in the center of my model here. So I'm pulling that back so I can build my model in front of it. And what I'll do is I'll start out by building the volume of this thing. And there's usually 3 stages that I build in when I do a model like this. I start with the volume, the overall size of the thing, and I keep it really low poly as much as possible. Only the bare necessity of geometry needed. Think of this like when you're drawing a character and you draw like a circle for the head and cylinders for the arms, cubes for the fingers. That kind of stuff. You're going very primitive to just get the overall shape. Now, I still have the kind of base geometry there needed to make this shape, but I'm keeping it really simple for now. And the reason for that is it's going to help me, in the long run, make this thing faster. If I cut in too much geometry, it becomes too much to micromanage early on. And if I get it in place and then cut in that new geometry, I have to move a whole lot less of it to get it there. So here you see I've made the cylinder. Just kind of use the default settings, added some subdivisions, and now I'm trying to just line it up in my front view to my template. Not the other way around. I want to move the geometry to fit the picture, and then I can always move it back. This is good for this case because it's one picture for something where you have a front and side. Yeah, you want your front and side shots to be nice and straight, so I wouldn't have to do this in that case. But for here it works great. So blocking this out, so I use the front camera. That's an orthographic view. Maybe not the best one to use because we always draw things with perspective, and we photos have perspective on them, and an orthographic camera doesn't have any on it. So I'm now tracing something that has perspective with a camera that doesn't, so the model won't line up quite the same. So sometimes I'll actually make a perspective camera, maybe change the lens type on it, the focal length, to get it to be a little bit more realistic or in line with the image I had. Right here I'm changing the scale. I realized I scaled it incorrectly, and I wanted a nice round shape, but it was skinny, so now I have to realign it now that I realized I screwed up my width. So moving vertices, I'm double clicking on edges to select edge loops to move them quickly, and just scaling them to get into place. And this is kind of a simple object for the most part, just kind of because it's quick to do a video on. But the concept isn't any different for if you're doing a character or detailed prop, some sort of rifle or gun, whatever. When I do a character, I start with the same thing. I pretty much build it all out of cubes and cylinders. I don't think I use anything else. I don't use any spheres. I'll use a cube, and I'll subdivide it so all sides are quads, and I'll extrude out a bottom for the chin, and then kind of shape that into a head shape, and just keep cutting in new edge loops or rings around the eyes and things like that, and define those before I cut new geometry. That's something I always try to do. I try to, whenever I cut in a new edge, I then try to place it before I cut in another edge. So every time I add new geometry, I try to make sure it's is the correct shape. So here I'm adding a cube. And I've gone ahead and sped up this video at this point, so we're running now at 400%. So I'm adding a cube, and I'm parenting it to the cylinder that I made, so it has the same orientation. And what I had to do just there was I had to freeze transformations on this, but just the scale. I didn't freeze transformations on rotation or translation because I want to be able to set the overall model back to a nice aligned, forward, front, back, whatever view. It's just an angle for modeling. But by parenting this cube under the cylinder, once it's parented under there, I could zero out the rotations and get the wing angled up the same way. And so now I'm sculpting in the perspective view, trying to get the overall shape right, and looking at it from every angle possible, trying to make sure it has kind of the look I want. But I'm also keeping an eye on the front view and making sure this thing lines up. And if I need to tweak it some or rotate it some, I will. The other thing I'm using is I'm using the Proxy Smooth. So if you hit 3 on your keyboard with any of your geometry selected, it is a Proxy Smooth. And I'm just looking at that because I could build this and smooth it later. Maybe that's not ultimately what I do, but it's a good way to start to block things out to see, hey, if I didn't just smooth this, how does that look? And then I could add geometry or shape based on that with that very minimal geometry. And even when doing game models, I'll do this. I mean, you can't do the Proxy Smooth in a game model, but maybe I'll start really low poly like this, and if I need a higher poly, I'll do a regular polygon smooth, and then work with that or reduce down or whatever. Maybe then I'll add in the real edges to kind of smooth it out. But it's much easier after having this overall volume. And so keeping it simple, and for the most part, so again, volume, surface detail, and really we're just kind of dealing at the volume level right now. I'm adding a little bit of surface detail and how I want this kind of kink to happen there. But if I just had that block, that would still be the volume if I didn't add that little kind of shift in the angle. And I'm kind of looking at how the overall curvature of the wing, which starts to get a little bit more in the surface detail, but we're still so low poly at this point, it's fine. Also, back in the engine, you may notice I cut some extra edges on the inside, and that was just to hold the shape when we smooth it. So, not necessarily something I need there if it's low poly, but something for the smoothing to hold the shape. So, like when we go around the lip to the inside of the engine, there's some extra edges there to kind of hold the shape of it rounding, so it isn't too round. You get a harder edge. The closer I have bevels, the closer it'll have a hard edge there around corners. So again, I made another cylinder to kind of make this nose cone, and parented under the engine that I made, and now just positioning it and make sure it kind of lines up with the picture. And it's not going to be perfect because I'm not the best artist when it comes to drawing concept art, but it's pretty close to perspective. So, I eyeball it as best I can, but it'll never perfectly line up. And even when you do photos, it'll never perfectly line up. So you get as close as you can and then call it good. Okay, so now I'm doing the inside fins here for this turbine. And I could do one individual fin and duplicate it 8 times. Also, you'll notice that I built 8 sides on the engine, and this inside piece is also 8 sides, and now I could use each one of those subdivisions, each one of those faces essentially for those propellers or fins or whatever they are in a jet engine. And I'm just going to make it as one piece. I could make individual ones, but it just has to look like they're separate. It doesn't actually have to be separate. The only thing that would convince me otherwise to do them as separate or as one piece in this case is which one is less polygons. But just for the sake of time, I'm doing it all as one piece here, which maybe is quicker, but maybe building one and duplicating it 8 times is faster too. But partly I'm building this as one piece just so I have something with a little bit more detail to show you, so when we start to get into that detail stage, you can see the kind of stuff I'm carving in here. So I'm selecting each one of these edges here, and then I'm going to give them a bevel, so I could separately extrude each one of those faces so there's some space between them. And just grabbing each one of those propellers now, and I'll extrude them out a little bit. So when I smooth, there's something kind of rounded there. And so this is starting my shape. I'm still not completely happy with the overall shape of them, and still need to add a little bit more. So I'm going to extrude in here so I get a little bit more depth. So it looks like there's a little bit more of a hard edge in there. And then I'm going to twist it just a little bit here so it kind of goes underneath each propeller. And then I'll start to angle these a little bit and give them a little bit more roundness too as I go. Oh, and so here where I beveled, it gave me a little bit of a weird edge right there that doesn't smooth that great, so I'm cutting in a better edge right now. And then I'll delete out the edges that I don't like here in a second after I go through all these. And this is one of those spots of like, hey, if I just made an 1/8 of this, or even left only 3 there and worked on them and then deleted the outer 2 so I had the right proportions. I could do like duplicate special and figure out the math of 360 divided by 8 and rotate it that many times and then weld it back together. But just for the sake of this, I'm keeping it all one piece. Sometimes that's better, sometimes that's worse, and sometimes I'll think about how am I unwrapping this. So maybe I would do only one of these, model one, and then just unwrap one propeller and then duplicate it 8 times. So then I have the UVs there, and I'll have to relay them out, but it's already unwrapped. When I say lay it out, make sure it's not taking up the same UV space, so I can have a unique texture in each part. Or maybe I don't. Maybe I want to use the same texture on each propeller to save time. So now's kind of a good time to start thinking about how you're going to do your UVs and thinking, okay, can I reuse these in some ways? So in this case here, I'm using my insert edge loop, but I changed the settings so it's splitting right down the center. And if you notice on the wings, I only built one wing. I didn't build 2. I built 1 and duplicated it over. So anyway, I could save time. I do. So as we're getting into this, I say we're definitely past the volume stage. We're getting into surface detail, and soon here we're getting into surface shape and size as I change these vents, and then we'll get into some detail stuff as I carve in a couple more edges here. So now it's starting to spin a little bit, and then I'm moving it back and just trying to find the happy medium because my perspective again is a little bit off here. Trying to find the right balance between the nose cone and where the propellers fit. And I realize I don't need this back here, so I'm going to delete this out and put that in because nobody will ever see that, so there's no reason for it to be there. Especially in a game engine, just because nobody sees it, or even when rendering, even if it's not visible, because it's behind something, the computer still has to render it and calculate it. So geometry that's not needed is better. So here I'm editing this a little bit because I could look from the side and see the nose cone was sticking out more than I wanted. So I pulled it back in a little bit more than what necessarily lines up with geometry. But here we go. Here we have a modeled jet engine. So I'm going to duplicate it now because I'm going to do 2 versions of the UVs. I'm going to do one where I just project the texture of the concept art straight onto it because we already know that jet engine should line up with that concept art. We can see it in our front view. So now I'm just doing a planar projection in Z and lining it up. And here I'm trying to mess with a manipulator tool to line it up, but I should probably do this in the UV window or UV edit window so I could do this a little bit more properly. So you can see I'm just tweaking the nose cone a little bit, but so it lines up with that texture. And here's what the plan is. Once I project this texture on here, I can go into our transfer maps utility, and once I have the good unwrap that I want, where everything's unwrapped nicely, I'll project this texture onto my my good unwrapped one, and I'll get that projection, but with my nice unwrap. And so this is great if you have like a character and you have the front and side and even back already drawn out. Project that, if you colored it, project that texture onto it, front, side, back, and then do a map projection for each side. You'll have to go, chop it up some in Photoshop to blend it. But it'll get you like, somewhere between like 50 to 80% of the way there for free. So if you've done good concept art, there's no reason not to use that in your model. You could really use it in your texture again, and it can save you a lot of time. So here I'm doing cylindrical projection. I'm trying to keep the seams on the bottom, in the places that'll be less noticeable. And I'm using my UV unwrap grid here. And the idea is I want to keep these squares square. So they're representative pixels. So we have writing on them to let me know if they're flipped backwards. So if, I need to write something on this, like, I don't know, it has a name written on the side or some serial number or something like that, that when I draw the texture, it comes out the right way, not reversed. And having the numbers on there let me know that. So I could flip all my UVs if the numbers are backwards. The squares I want square for the most part, but you'll notice as I go on here, I'll scale some of this stuff and taper it, and it'll make my squares taper. And I'm not so worried about the taper, I'm just worried about all the lines being straight. And what I mean by that is kind of no kinks going down a face, and we'll see this here in a minute. But I'm just going through and unwrapping this, trying to keep all the... Okay, here we go. So all the squares roughly square, but see, okay, so see what I'm doing there? That's a straight line going down. There's no kind of zigzaggy lines. Anywhere I see a line kind of kinking at an angle, I'm going to scale it a little bit more So I'm talking like vertical up and down lines of those columns of numbers. We shouldn't see that. So I think at this point I got upside down and a little bit confused on which side was top and which side was bottom. So I'll unwrap this again. But so now I'm going to use the unfold tool on this, which you'll see is the button kind of third from the top right there. Just use unfold and drag it until it's nice and unfolded. I'll grab the edges there at the corners of the box, and I do UV split in the UV texture editor menu, and that way when I do the unfold, they could actually spread apart instead of still being attached. Sort of like taking apart a box. It's hard to flatten them unless you peel apart the edges. And I think this is the part where I realized I'm upside down, so I'm grabbing those edges and adding them to the other side. So again, this grid is representative of pixels. So not only do you not want them to distort, but you want them at the same resolution, because we don't want this really crisp texture on our wing and this really blurry texture on the engine, because they're at different resolutions. So when I add these two wings, I'll try to get the squares roughly the same size, so the same resolution. And again, so I was talking about why make the same thing twice. Those wings are the same on both sides, so I deleted the other one and duplicated the one sort of UV'd over and put it in the same position. I think I had a point constraint to get it there because the numbers weren't quite the same, but whatever, it lines up fine. So yeah, notice that the texture on the wings is roughly the same size as the fuselage or engine or whatever. And that way I know when I put a texture on there, all the stuff will be the same resolution. It'll all be just as crisp. We won't have this blurry line that's going across the engine, but the wings are really crisp. And that's something you want to think about, not only just for this prop, but your whole world. So like if your character has a gun and he's holding his gun in his hand, you want to make sure that at least if you're seeing first person, that gun texture and the hand texture are roughly the same resolution, or again you'll have blurry hand, crisp gun, and it makes it look less realistic. Same if you're in third person view of you could have the other way around, like here's a really crisp character texture, but then the gun looks really blurry for some reason. So keeping, when you have a whole scene, you want to throw this texture on there and make sure everything's roughly the same size, and which could be a little bit hard to account, because maybe you want the character's texture twice the size, because it's 1024 by 1024, and then let's say the gun is 512 by 512 and half the size of that texture. So you have to account for that sum. So not necessarily everything the same resolution, but close. So you can repeat your UVs when or your texture when you go in the hyper shader. There's a 2D texture place node. There's a section in there called repeat UVs in there. And so, like if it's say 1024 by 1024, I might say I repeat it 4 times. And then if it's a 512 by 512, repeat it twice. So I could kind of keep my resolutions the same across different objects, and then I'll know roughly what the pixel density is between those two pictures, and I could keep them the same. So here I'm just laying things out, just trying to find a good optimal layout for this texture map where I'm using up as much real estate as possible. I've scaled everything as big as possible, but I don't have things too close together. That size that I have my UV texture window right now might be the size of that texture that I'm putting out. I might paint this at 1024 by 1024, but I might only put out a 512 or 256 by 256. So I need to make sure that when I get small, that my pixels aren't going to be so close together, because my UVs are so close together that the wings bleed into the engine, or that the UVs are so close to the edge of the texture, when that texture starts to repeat, it's not bleeding into the next looping of it, because I don't know, the engine is on the edge and the wings are just right on the edge on the right. So, all right, so I have my UVs laid out right. I'm going to get the two models lined up, and now I'm going to go to what is it? My texture window. Oh, and I'm combining the models here just to keep things a little bit easier. So window, and I'm going to transfer maps. So it's lighting and rendering transfer maps. And I need to select the target mesh, so the thing I want to project the texture onto, and then the source mesh, for what I want it to come from. I'm copying over diffuse, which is just the color. And here I run into, oh no, this wasn't the spot. So there, it transferred over. So now I have that texture on my good UVs. And so that's a good way to start. It's a good starting place for painting. I've got part of that laid out. So now I'm going to export out my UVs, and there was some weird little glitch here where it wanted to be set to my default project and not export out to my other projects. So it takes me a second to figure that out. I'm going to get a brief intermission while I go do that. But I think that worked. No, you're still looking at me trying to figure out what's going on. I get this every now and then, and it seems like if you set to the default project, then it works. So I'm saving out a PNG of my UVs at 1024 by 1024, and the thing I forgot to set my texture size when I transferred my map. So I'm going to go ahead and re-export them out at the right size, and I turned the sample rate really high so it gets the crispest texture possible. Probably really didn't need to do that. You'll see here me jumping around trying to figure out what's going on, and what happens is it's taking forever to render. So I'm going like, why didn't it update? And why is my computer really slow right now? And when I jump back to Maya, I'll realize it's still rendering here. That's fine, because it'll give me time to talk and talk about this process. So here you can see, so I'm starting with that concept art right there. I'm projecting it onto the model. It's the starting point for me painting my map. So it won't be 100% there. You can see right now in the lower corner it's crawling up. But it's a good starting point. And like I said, if you have a character, you've got the front, side, and back. I've been on projects where it just sped us up tremendously because you could project that awesome concept art right onto the model and have a good starting place for it, and have very little cleanup that's needed. So part of this is I just have a good understanding of what my UV space is here and where everything went. So I'm just going to start cleaning this up, but I just duplicated the existing texture, and now I'm just going to go start filling this stuff in, and I'm blocking it out. Think again like painting. I'm not detailing this thing. I'm going to do a rough pass to clean this up, and then I'll see how it looks. And that's what I'll do. I'll do the first pass on this, and then I do the cleanup pass. But you'll see when we get there, it gets you pretty darn close. So trying to do things quick, I cleaned up that side, and I'm just duplicating the right side over to the left side for now. And I'll see how that works if I need to clean up the streaks. Cleaning up the wings here, make sure they're nice and lined up. It only projected onto the model's right wing, so I need the copy over the left wing. And now I'm trying to figure out what color do I want on the bottom to start with, if I need black or if I should put blue down there. So we'll go with this blue and see how it works, but I think it probably needs some black, or at least some streak lines like I'm doing. And so even if this isn't your style, this is how I recommend painting things, because once you get it in your scene with these blocked out colors, so I'm not shading anything. Everything's nice, solid colors blocked out. At least for props and things like that. You can get a long way with this and realize how little you actually need to clean up after that. And especially if you shrink your texture down, a lot of the time Maya will blur the stuff for you. If the stuff is in the background, nobody's really going to notice it. I mean, I know you do because you're sitting there staring at it all day. But when it's in the background of your scene, people are going to be focused on what's going on in the foreground. If you got a character up there or whatever, that's what they're going to be paying attention to. And this stuff is just kind of ambience more than something to really pay attention to. So you can get away with a lot of lack of detail in the background. But if it's a foreground object, yeah, spend the time on it. But also pay attention to it. So only do what's needed. So like if this was something that like this concept image, I only see it from the side. This is the only side I'm worried about painting. I'll fill in the backside enough so it doesn't look wrong, but I'm not going to sit there and detail something that the camera's never going to look at. So figure out what you really need to do, and versus what you want to do, because you get away with just a lot of what you need to do, and nobody notices the rest. So. Still just kind of taking what's here and blocking it out. It's a rough pass. I'm just trying to do this fast to see how it turns out. I know a lot of stuff's blurring, so I know I need to go clean this up and fill it in. I'm not sure that a lot of it will look right at first, but it'll be close. So yeah, just going through and kind of cleaning up the edges for the most part. But you can see that that projection saved me a lot of time just figuring out where to place colors. I don't have to think about this anymore. I know, okay, that's the white glare part. You know, uh, there's less thinking. Now on the propellers, that didn't project so well because the curvature didn't line up so much. So I'm just going to go around here and block in the colors. And you see I'm not being particularly precise. Again, it's kind of bleeding around the edges, but I'm just kind of blocking this in. And I'm looking at my concept art. I'm sampling the colors off of it. That concept is already done. Why refigure out the colors? So just doing in the darker edges. Now, if I was, doing this in production, the real version, I might do a layer for each one of the colors, especially like something like this, where it's what I got 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 colors in here. I just do a layer for each color and build them up layer by layer. So if we needed to shift the hue of something, like, say like, well, the highlight's good and the second color is good, but that shadow blue is, a little bit much. What if we shifted onto this hue? And that way we could just treat that one color. And then if I needed shading or anything like that, I'd do that on top. If I needed to blur things, I'd duplicate layers, and so I'd always have my clean layer below or hidden or whatever, and start to work with it. Here, rather than painting this, I'm marqueing selections, and then I'm going to feather it, just as a way to kind of get a rounded shape. Giving a feather of 4 pixels, and then just doing a couple paint passes on it to brush in that highlight. So here I did feather a little bit, but it's just, again, to save time because I'm lazy and I don't want to spend time trying to paint these crisp lines that I don't know how they're actually going to look. So, this is the rough pass. This is get your first blocking there, kind of see if everything lines up before you paint in the detail, because you don't know if it's going to line up. So here we go. Here's our model. Here's the first pass of the texture on there, and it's pretty darn close. There's some stuff I could clean up. I should. Some of those lines aren't quite straight, and some things aren't lining up. But for the most part, that's it. And already got a modeled and textured image on there. So you can see, and I think that was an hour and a half time total. And I'm not rushing. I'm taking my time while doing it, and running into a couple of glitches. Hour and a half. From concept art to model ready to go for the most part. Let's say hour 45 after I go back and clean it up. And if I was again focused and trying to speed run that, maybe in an hour, maybe hour and a half total, with a lot of finessing. But just if you kind of follow those rules of volume, surface, detail when building any model, in the whole kind of range. Don't start another process till you've gotten your volume done. Especially like a character, do all your volume, a whole body, face, whatever. Do the surface stuff, and then do the detail after that. It'll save you a lot of time in placing stuff. Using your concept art to start your textures will speed you up a lot. Blocking out your texture and throwing on there will speed you up and really see what you need to detail after that. So, after that, if I needed metal, I'd go grab a texture of metal and like multiply it over that. So there's a lot of little tricks to speed you up. But hopefully that gives you a good start on how to get faster at modeling stuff, how to crank something out quickly. And once you kind of could see the whole picture, it speeds you up overall and lets you know where you actually need to put your efforts next, instead of micromanaging little things that don't matter so much at that point. So I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video.